Next, let's talk about cell death and regeneration. So we talked about development and how cells are made. Now let's talk about how cells die and regenerate. So all cells have a regulated and programmed suicide mechanism called apoptosis. This is only found in multicellular organisms, as it sacrifices the viability of the specific cell for the sake of the whole organism. Obviously, the first natural instinct any living thing has, whether it be a human, animal, cell, anything, bacteria, virus, anything, is it wants to live and it wants to reproduce. Those are pretty much the two main things. In order to form a multicellular organism, the cell has to give up both of these basic instincts. It has to go beyond both those instincts. It can't just reproduce as much as it wants to, because that would harm the organism as a whole. That would lead to cancer. And so a lot of those mechanisms are controlled, and the cells in your body basically sacrifice that instinct to reproduce in order for you as an organism to survive and for you to reproduce as well. The second is to live. It also gives up that because it knows that if it suffers damage or if something happens to it that might harm the organism, if it gets out of control, it will undergo apoptosis, which will be a suicide mechanism, and it'll give up its life. And obviously that goes against the instinct, but it does that again so you don't, the organism itself doesn't get harmed as a whole. This is usually done in situations of extreme external stress, or in the case of extreme DNA damage. Essentially something that can't be repaired. Like I mentioned, it has the body and the cells, they have DNA repair mechanisms. They have like mechanisms if, for example, like the outer membrane gets damaged or something like that, like external mechanism for stress. But sometimes it gets to the point where the built-in mechanisms can't fix it, and if it continues, it'll do damage to the whole organism. For example, if you undergo necrosis, which is unnatural cell death, so for example, if you like burn your hand or you like get hit really hard, the cell will still die and it'll break apart, and all of the everything inside the cell will kind of get spilt out into all of the other cells and might damage some of the other cells surrounding, or may cause harm to the other cells, which isn't good. Or if you have, again, in the case of extreme DNA damage, you might have mutations which lead to cancer, which again is very bad. So in these cases, so to avoid these cases, it will very cleanly and very neatly just commit suicide through this apoptosis, which like leaves nothing to be spilt out. It controls everything, makes sure everything gets deleted and managed properly, make sure that there's no mutation, anything left over. And this process is vital to prevent genetic disorders like cancer. All cases of cancer have disabled apoptosis in order to grow unregulated. That's why it's extremely common. Very much the most common gene mutation in cancer is the p53 mutation. And p53 mutation that's the gene that controls this apoptosis, one of the main genes that controls this apoptosis mechanism. So the vast majority of cancers have a mutation in this gene which disable apoptosis or find a way to circumnavigate it or go around it. Otherwise, from their DNA damage and their rapid rate of growth, they would the mechanism would be activated and they would undergo this process. In addition to cell death, even after cell death, many animals actually, or many organisms, have a thing called regeneration. Some animals, which are very common, like starfish, worms, newts, other similar species, they have regenerative abilities potent enough to regrow limbs and tails from nothing, or essentially nothing. Like if a starfish loses entire one of its limbs, it can just regrow back, right? That's what I mean from nothing, if the limb is fully removed. This process is not fully understood and is still being researched heavily, but generally it involves dedifferentiation of cells in that area into stem cells and the formation of a blastema, which is a mass of pluripotent stem cells. The blastema then undergoes rapid cell proliferation and differentiation to repair and regenerate all of the lost tissue. Essentially, all the cells in that area that got damaged, they dedifferentiate into stem cells, form a clump, and then that clump undergoes massive reproduction and proliferation, leading to many stem cells. And then each of those stem cells differentiate into all of the tissues they need, all like the skin, the organs, and everything else that you need in that area. And then they just migrate to wherever they need to go. It is so far thought that blastemas can differentiate into any cell type except neurons, meaning that neural organs cannot be regenerated. So this goes back to like the whole zombie movie trope. If you cut off a zombie's arm, it'll either regrow back or it can keep going. If you hit a zombie in the brain or you destroy its brain, it can't regenerate that and it dies. Same thing with animals. Like if you destroy the brain or any other important neural organs, it can't be regenerated and the organism will die. Humans do have limited regenerative capability, the most impressive of which is the liver, which may regenerate fully from removal of as much as 90% of its mass. So you can get rid of 90% of your liver, and over time, it'll actually go back to its regenerate back to its original size. However, it is not thought to use pluripotent stem cells or blastema, but rather uses the existing mature hepatocytes that are already there, and it undergoes proliferation of those hepatocytes, which regenerate the kidney. So it doesn't form the blastema, it doesn't dedifferentiate back to stem cells. It just uses the existing hepatocytes as a base to regenerate. There are other organs such as ribs, vas deferens, and in some cases fingertips, which can also be regenerated. If you break a rib, or if you remove a rib, actually, if you undergo vasectomy, sometimes the vas deferens can regenerate. Fingertips, if it's shallow enough of a cut, you can regenerate a fingertip. Induced pluripotent stem cells are a big step into regenerative medicine, and it is a very heavily researched and fast-growing field at this time. No huge technology has been released as of yet. When I say that, I obviously mean there's plenty of big research and huge research with huge implications coming out all the time in this field, regenerative medicine. But what I mean is there's no technology where you can regrow a kidney from scratch. There's no technology where you can regrow a brain from scratch. There are things which are coming kind of close, specifically organoids, which they've done with a couple of organs. Essentially, they're clumps of stem cells which can function as or perform functions similar to an organ, like a kidney. But they're not there yet, and they can't be like used in people yet, and they're not efficient yet. And so that's what I mean with that. But this is a very fast-growing and very popular field now, regenerative medicine. Since the advent or the discovery of these induced pluripotent stem cells, which are huge for biology, one of the biggest discoveries in medicine in the past 20, 30, 40 years. Along with, obviously, we talked about before CRISPR-Cas9, which is another big thing